We're on page 247. Looking at the qualifications of a pastor. Now, just a quick, real quick recap from last week. Just there's one little thing that we disagree with on this, on what Brother Sargent gives us in the study, and that is, it's kind of an important thing. And so, as we go through the study, there's a few little things that they're gonna, as they come up, his interpretation of the terms pastor, bishop, and elder, and his philosophy of church polity is going to affect his interpretation of the qualifications to a certain degree. So just keep that in mind. And so as we go through and discuss that, we will keep that in mind. Now, that being said, we have 25 or 22 qualifications here. It says of a pastor. I would say that these qualifications are specifically for the one holding the office of a bishop, because that is what it says in the Bible. The word bishop is used, and I believe that that is the case. Now, someone who is a pastor, in our day, we generally will call the bishop pastor. Now, that is one of his jobs as the bishop. Okay. And he's going to give, every time he's going to talk about the pastor. But understand that not everyone who is a pastor is a bishop. And the qualifications are for the bishop. Okay. So, however, I would say by extension, that as a general rule, the qualifications for a bishop will also go onto a pastor, because a pastor usually is going to have a lot more interaction and oftentimes going to have a position. That's what makes the difference. Now, an elder, on the other hand, even though when you get to the book of Titus and it starts talking about, an elder, talks about the elder ordaining elders in every city. And then he says, if any be blameless, the husband of one wife, so on. Then it says, for the bishop must be, okay, so he's talking about ordaining elders, but the qualifications are for bishops, okay? So that being said, I do believe, though, that a bishop is going to be an elder also, okay? Now, just so that we're clear on it, elders don't necessarily always have positions. And so that being the case, they don't necessarily have to meet all 22 qualifications of the bishop. And I would say that in some cases, the pastors, if they're not in the position of the bishop, they wouldn't necessarily have to meet every single one of the qualifications. Now, saying that, some people might say, whoa, wait a minute. Understand, when we're talking about a senior pastor, you need to meet the qualifications. Flat, that's what it is, okay? You may have someone who has a particular pastoral role. It's going to depend. We'll get into that a little bit more when we get to the second qualification. What I believe about the second qualification is a little bit different than what he believes. And I believe that that is specifically for the bishop, okay? Whereas a pastor may not have to do that necessarily. Now, although, let me say it this way. So a pastor, like a youth pastor, we'll say, for example, or an associate pastor, assistant pastor, okay? An assistant pastor who may pastor single men in the church, I don't believe necessarily has to be married. But I do believe that the bishop needs to be married. I do believe that is a qualification. And I believe that based on 1 Timothy chapter 3, we're going to find it says must be. And this is why I say that the qualifications may not all be pertaining to everyone who holds a position of a pastor, but it does always pertain to one who is a bishop. Okay, I want to make sure that you guys see that clearly. That what I'm explaining, or what I'm saying here, how these apply these are specifically for the bishop. Now, all that being said, these qualifications are good things for everybody in general. And so as we go through these, we're going to look at these primarily specifically for the bishop, but then secondarily, we're going to look at these qualifications or these characteristics, okay? We're going to look at them from a perspective of everybody. How does this apply to you? Okay, so the first one really is going to be a really, it can be a really fun one, really difficult to, to live up to, depending on what you believe it means. And so let's get into that. Now I know I may have just said some things that kind of had your mind racing in different directions and things like that. So just bring it back into here. And as we go through this, I'll explain, Lord allowing and reminding me, I will explain. And if I don't remember and you remember, ask me, how does this pertain to a pastor? And then I'm going to tell you it depends on what the pastor's position is for. Okay, like number two, again, if it's an assistant pastor that is pastoring single men, that's that one. The general mindset still applies, but the specific qualification I don't believe necessarily does. Okay, and we'll talk about that if we get to it tonight. The qualification there, although he disagrees with me, I believe it means that the bishop must be married. Okay, but I don't believe every pastor needs to be married. It just depends on who they're pastoring. Okay, so, but the specific wording of the verse is, as it says, husband of one wife. I'm just kind of jumping to it, but as it says, the husband of one wife, that wording is a one woman husband or a one wife husband. In other words, it's somebody married to just one person. Okay. So obviously that's good for everybody. Well, every man, anyways, not ladies. On the adverse side of that, you can go to the later on, and for a widow indeed, which I think is interesting that we don't. I know we talk about the offices and stuff, but a widow indeed is like a position in the church, even though it may not be an office. It's like it has qualifications, but you can study that. I believe it's 1 Timothy 5. The 5. 5, yeah, chapter 5. Yeah. So, anyways, let's jump into blameless here. We'll talk about that, then we'll get into further stuff. We'll probably, I'm going to try to maybe deal with the first two tonight if we can, Lord willing here. So, Titus Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Let's read through that real quick. This will give us all the qualifications, all the things, and then, of course, we'll jump into each one. And discuss those. So this is a true saying. If a man desire the office of a bishop, and I think it's funny that he doesn't deal with that here, but the very first qualification isn't even mentioned as a qualification, but it is a qualification, and it's this word, man. If a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. And I would say that before we get into the must-be's, I think it's a requirement to desire the office of a bishop, not just be plugged into it. It needs to be something that you want to do because you believe God wants you to do it. And so there has to be a desire there. You have to be a man. And hey, it's good. It's a good work. It's a good work to desire. And I think that all men ought to aspire to be qualified for it, whether they're specifically called to it or not, because in some cases, many times, churches are without a senior pastor or bishop, and an elder has to fill the role of a bishop temporarily. Okay? And an elder may not be, quote unquote, called to be a bishop, but he may have to fill the office temporarily, and you kind of need to, fit the role that you're going to fill. even though it may be temporary. I can see some very temporary circumstances where maybe a single guy might cover the pulpit for a while or something like that. But I believe that all of these things need to be checked off, so to speak, even though that's not exactly the way we think about it. This ought to be a matter of the heart first and foremost, and then it's an outpouring from the heart. But anyways, let's just read the passage here. Verse 2. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth his own house, or one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Then we have Titus chapter 1, verses 6 through 9. If any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly, for a bishop must be blameless, as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate, holding fast the faithful word as he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convince the gainsayers. All right. So the first one is he must be blameless. Very good. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2 says, bishop must be blameless. A bishop then must be blameless. Okay, so, and then also in Titus 1, verses 6 and 7, it says it twice there. It says, if any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. Then verse 7, for a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God, not self-willed, not sin, and so on, as we already read. So he says here, this word means he is without censure or rebuke in his conduct, that he stands unaccused, that there are no questions concerning his deportment. No man can expect to have the confidence of his people when even a hint of scandal touches him. Now, let me back up for a second and make a statement about that. There are often in our world false accusations. Okay, so blameless does not mean that there are no false accusations against you. Okay, that does happen from time to time. People misunderstand things, or they flat out blatantly accuse people of things that aren't true. And so it does not mean that, well, any pastor can be ousted just because somebody makes some false accusation. Now, while the accusation is in place, the church really needs to consider that. And is there any possibility it might be true? If there is, then the pastor needs to basically deal with the issue pretty quickly, or it does put his leadership ability into question. So again, we got to take that into consideration. And in fact, he's going to give a disclaimer here at the end as well. But verse number 7 there of Titus 1 connects this qualification with what? Nobody knows. Stewardship. Yeah, it connects it with stewardship. It says, for bishop must be blameless as the steward of God, right? And so connecting it with stewardship, then we have 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. According to verse 2, a pastor should be a man who is found faithful. Yeah, because It is required. Let's back up. He says, let a man so account of us as the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. So faithfulness there is a requirement for those who are the stewards of the mysteries of God, those who are the ministers of Christ. Make sense? Although that obviously more widely applies to many, not just pastors, but would all the more apply to pastors and especially bishops. So I'm trying to work my language properly so that I don't confuse you guys on the different titles. Okay, so when I say pastor, I need to specify in this particular study, because most of the time when we say pastor, we're just talking about the bishop most of the time. But for understanding, so I don't confuse you guys, I'm gonna use the term bishop where bishop applies, and then I'm gonna try to anyways use the term bishop where bishop applies, pastor where pastor applies. So does that make sense? Anybody confused already? All right, good. We're good. Amen. Amen. Y'all are brilliant. All right. So note, he says, when considering a man for the pastorate, a church should carefully examine his faithfulness to his previous ministries. Okay, so we look at Matthew chapter 25, verse 21. It says, his Lord saith unto him, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. So, in other words, the Lord here, not necessarily talking about, a bishop or even a pastor or an elder necessarily, just speaking of people in general. This steward, this person who is serving the Lord, he's been a faithful servant, and he has been or was faithful over the things that he was given to do, his previous responsibilities. And so because of that, he's given more, right? And then furthermore, we have Luke 16 verses 10 through 12. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. He that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. This is exactly why if someone isn't, and this is some pastors, some bishops, some people in authority, they think, well, if I can just get people doing stuff or give them a position, then maybe they'll be faithful. That's not the case. You give them little stuff to do, and then as they get faithful with the little stuff, then you give them more, right? This is what he says here, that he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. You can't expect to just bring somebody in that you don't know, and as we're going to talk about later, lay hands suddenly on no man. You can't just be like, you know what, if I make this person the assistant pastor, maybe they'll be faithful to church. That's not the way to do it. It's not the way to do it. You get them faithful in the small things first. And yes, sometimes you have to teach people to be faithful in small things. But you know what? I wasn't faithful in the small things when I first got saved. God had to grow me in that area. And, it's been almost 20 years now. And it took time, and I needed men around me to show me how to be faithful. And then I started learning, and, the more faithful I was in little things, the bigger things that I got to do. And so, anyways, yeah. So it gives you the opportunity to do lots of things. But anyways, he says, if therefore you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? Now, obviously, this is going to apply in a whole lot of areas, but here we're dealing with the matter of faithfulness. He's drawing more. He's drawing more to this concept of blamelessness to your previous things that you've done in the past. So you look back and you say, how did they do on this? How did this man do here? Whatever it is, really, in all of our circumstances, not just for the bishop, but also, for anybody. If you want to do something more in the ministry, then you have to show some faithfulness in some smaller things. And so the more faithfulness you show in smaller things, the more opportunity you have to do bigger things or more difficult things. Yes, sir.
That's why some churches, I'm saying all of them, put people in a position to try to put them in a high authority. See how much faith they have?
Yeah, I think that's backwards when people do that. When people just stick people in a high position or something when they've not yet. I mean, even a deacon, as we're going to get to, even a deacon has to be proven before he can become a deacon. I mean, and then, to try to stick somebody in a pastoral role, or even an elder role. See, an elder, even though they may not have a specific position in the church, they shouldn't be recognized as an elder even without a position until they've been faithful in the small things. So somebody might be really knowledgeable in the Bible, but if they're not faithful to church, I'm not going to point people to them and tell them to follow that man, because they have to be faithful in the small stuff first. I mean, church attendance is a little thing. That's like something that really should just be like, duh, right? But and then you add other little things to that. Your devotion with the Lord. That's a small thing, and people look and they say, well, I study my Bible so that I can teach my Sunday school lesson. Well, great. Study your Bible so that you can teach yourself. Be faithful in the small things. And then the Sunday school lesson isn't usually a difficulty if you're already spending time with the Lord, or a church sermon. Some pastors get into the rut of studying for their messages, but not having their own personal quiet time with the Lord. That's bad. That's not good. That's being unfaithful in the small things so that you can be faithful in the big things. Backwards. Be faithful in the small things. I'll be honest, sometimes I can't get it when it comes to preaching sometimes. Figure that. Sometimes I will read the passage. I will just pore over it. I'll pray about it, and the Lord just won't give me any sort of semblance of a message. And then I just focus on, I'm just like, okay, Lord, you're just going to have to figure it out, because I'm running out of time and Sunday's coming soon, and I need it. Need your help. And I'll just focus on making sure I'm faithful to my little time with him in the morning and in the evening. And then, you know what? Week goes on. I might spend a special time of prayer with him. And then all of a sudden, I'm just casually going over the same passage that I've just poured over all week, couldn't figure it. And then all of a sudden, boom, there it is. Or sometimes, you know what? He's done it to me a couple of times where I show up to church and I'm like, Lord, I need your help. I don't even know what I'm going to say. I think I might just read the chapter and just close the book and go home, and say, here it is, guys. Here's the chapter. It says what it says. See you later. I don't know. You guys may think, man, Pastor, why would you be that way? Well, I mean, sometimes that's the way I feel. But then I get up here and I go to do it. And because I was faithful in the little things throughout the week, just my time with the Lord and being faithful with that. And yes, I was faithful to study. I was faithful to look at. I was faithful. Sometimes the Lord will just bring stuff to my mind. You guys see it happen all the time, because I'm like, you know what? I didn't put this in the notes. Wasn't planning on this. Boom. He just gave it to me just now, and that happens. But it doesn't happen because I just focus on the big stuff. It happens because I focus on the little stuff. And when we're faithful in the little stuff, God will sometimes come through on the big things when we can't figure it out. Because there are times that I'll be honest with you, there are many times where I'll have a chapter that I'm getting ready to preach this coming week or whatever. And maybe I've preached it so much that I've just gotten so familiar with it that I just can't put it together for our for the Sunday morning sermon. And so I'm just like, Lord, I need your help. I don't know what I'm going to do here. And sometimes he's just like, it's okay. Just keep reading the passage. I'll read the passage 15, 18, 25 times throughout the week. And I'm still like, it's a good passage, Lord. It's good. It's good stuff. I just preached that same thing for the last 3 weeks, though. What am I going to do this week? I mean, Hebrews is like that. I'll just be honest with you. Hebrews is like that. You're same kind of stuff, chapter after chapter after chapter. And so I'm like, Lord, how am I going to give them something more? I don't want to give them something that's not in the chapter. And so he just comes through and gives it to me, not saying that I cover everything that needs that could be covered, but it's because of the little stuff, the faithful in the little things before dealing with the big things. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
I was going to say too, it might be more clearer if you were to say, and if you have not been faithful with what's your own,
Yeah.
You shall get which is another.
Well, in this case, he's talking about somebody who's been giving, I need to kind of give you a little bit of cultural understanding on this. So cultural situation of this is most of the time, well, let's look at it this way. We'll just look at it modern day. Okay. This verse here talking about being faithful in that which is another man's, let's look at it as you're an employee and you're responsible for your employer's stuff. Okay. Your employer's situation, right? He's saying, if you can't be faithful in your job, how can you expect to be successful in your own business? Make sense? So if you can't be faithful with something that belongs to somebody else, how can you expect to have your own and it work out? Right? So if I can't be a good employee and make my employer successful, how am I going to make my own company successful? Make sense? So that's kind of the concept is you're serving someone else, and you're serving someone else until you get stable enough to be able to serve, have your own situation there, your own stuff, to where you may have servants serving you, or employees serving you. So does that make sense? That's kind of the concept there is, how can you expect to be successful on your own if you can't even be successful with somebody else's help using their stuff, so, so that's the thought process there. And again, the likening there to finances and riches and things like that, it's not necessarily about the financial side as much as it is about being faithful, even in things that seem to be less significant. Okay. Sometimes we just get, we Americans, we like to look at the big stuff and, big shiny stuff. It gets our attention, right? We want to go after that. Oh, doing this makes me look better, right? Right? And some preachers get that way. Hey, preaching makes me look good, so I'm going to focus on the preaching part. No, because God will squash that. If you're not faithful in the little stuff, then the preaching part won't work out. You won't. The limelight won't be so limey, whatever that means. It won't be so bright in the spotlight if you don't have the little stuff down, if you don't focus on the little stuff. And see, that's one of the things when we start talking about not being a novice, when we get down to that, your previous performance will determine your future opportunities, so in this case, we're talking about being blameless. If you look back at your track record, and your track record is full of nothing but failure on little things or negligence or whatever, that is the opposite of blameless. That's not a good steward. That's not faithfulness in stewardship. So does that make sense? Seems like we kind of, it almost seems like he kind of left the blameless thing, but I'm trying to tie it back in. But he goes on here, number 3, a pastor's conduct should give no offense in anything, that the ministry be not blamed. And this is 2 Corinthians 6, 3 and 4. By the way, he uses the word pastor here. I would use actually Christian. Okay, a Christian's conduct should give no offense in anything, that the ministry be not blamed. Now, here he says, giving no offense in anything, that the ministry be not blamed, but in all things, approving ourselves as the ministers of God, in much patience, in afflictions and necessities and distresses. And of course, the context here, Paul's talking about he and his ministry party, so to speak, is, those that minister with him. But I believe that this applies to everybody, every Christian. So he gives a note here. He says, this does not mean that he will never offend anyone. Okay. It doesn't mean that offenses aren't ever going to happen. The message we are to preach can be offensive, but it is, but the man himself, the person, the Christian themselves aren't to be offensive. The message might be offensive. It may be hard to swallow that you're a sinner, but the fact remains you're a sinner. Now, I don't have to be a jerk about it, though. I don't have to be, I don't have to be somebody that's constantly like beating on people about it. I can preach the message, preach the word and deal with that. Now, I have to be, as Paul told Timothy, preach the word, be instant in season, out of season. He said, reprove, rebuke, and exhort. And sometimes we leave out exhortation and we just want to reprove and rebuke. We just want to tell everybody all the things where they're wrong and stuff, right? We don't want to encourage them. We just want to beat them up. Some people are that way. I'm not really that way. I would rather do the encouraging than beating up, personally. But sometimes you gotta. Well, no, you never have to beat them up. Sometimes you have to rebuke. Sometimes you have to reprove. In fact, you have to a lot. But you also have to encourage, or what's the word in the verse? Exhort. There we go. Yes. So he says here that an example of blamable behavior is given in Galatians 2 verses 11 through 14. It says, but when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face because he was to be blamed. Well, the word's even used there. For before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles. But when they were come, he withdrew himself. He withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. And the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. But when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, if thou being a Jew livest after the manner of the Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compellest thou the Jews, or the Gentiles rather, to live as do the Jews? So, let me ask you a question. Did this permanently disqualify Peter from the ministry? No. But he needed to be rebuked. There was blamability in that circumstance. And you know what? You know why he wasn't disqualified? Because Peter corrected it. It doesn't tell us here, but we know that Peter continued in the ministry, so he must have corrected it. We have to assume that he corrected it, otherwise he wouldn't be continuing in the ministry. Make sense? So there you go. So on this matter of blamelessness, I really want to, and I know this is opening a can of worms with 10 minutes left. I really want to talk about the next subject because it goes with, or the real issue goes back to blamability. I might just not and deal with it next week, and then go back to just refer back to this blamable or blamability thing. So let's just close it out by talking about blamelessness. What points, thoughts, concepts, questions, ideas, things do you have with what we've discussed? Just let's keep it on the subject of a bishop being blameless.